left me on such a cliffhanger last week that I had to be with you in person to find out the rest.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
I actually flew to Sabrina this time.
But I was on the East Coast.
Your long stint of being on the East Coast
both
is done.
flew back here.
We recorded an episode. Technically, the Boston Strangler and Boston Common were not supposed to be. They were scheduled for like a week after.
A week later.
But you had done research. My audio, cursed. Didn't work. I've had so many issues.
Yeah.
And it was also the episode where we talked about all of our big life events. So I'm going to make us re-talk about it.
But real quick, we do need to say, because just to like dwell on this for a moment, we have been having so many technical difficulties.
They're back.
And they're back.
For me.
Yes, but therefore for me as well.
Yeah, because you suffer from my technical difficulties.
We haven't had this many issues since year one of our recording the podcast.
Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. Basically what happened was we were recording 2 episodes back to back. We recorded.
Mm-hmm.
We clicked stop. That one's fine.
Totally fine.
We clicked record again. And ever since, I've had so many issues. You guys have heard it. I sound underwater sometimes. Mm-hmm. In this case, we have to redo an entire episode.
Like a 2-hour long
episode. There's just a lot of things that have been happening over the past month. And I've talked to just about every customer service person and tech person that you can. I've talked to like 3 or 4 companies.
Yeah. So
and no one seems to know. It's a mystery.
There's a vault of
my recording stuff is possessed, but luckily I'm hooked into all of your stuff. So
what
I
if
think
mine gets possessed right now? Knock on freaking wood.
It works when we're together, but not for
so far. It has
me solo.
I don't know why I really like that. Anyway, that's all to say. We're haunted. You are haunted.
We already know that.
Therefore, we're all haunted.
Mm-hmm.
But
this is 2 Girls, 1 Ghost.
2 Girls, 1 Ghost. And we are your ghostesses. That is Corinne.
Hello.
I am Sabrina. And like Corinne said, we've had so many life events. Corinne, you're married.
We'll do the rundown. Let's do you first.
Okay, because mine's short.
You had, yes, but yours also happened before mine. You had a wild.
Okay, yes. So I was on the East Coast for my cousin's wedding, and then I was driving up to your wedding in Vermont on Thursday. My sister was due June 5th, but
before you could even get to Vermont.
Yeah, May
a few days before.
25th. The day before I was supposed to drive up to Corinne's, little Noemi, my niece, my adorable, sweet, cute niece, was born, brought into this world. She's so adorable. And it was amazing because I was always planning to be on the East Coast for a couple weeks in anticipation of, both weddings and then also in anticipation of Noemi being born. And it worked out even better because I got to have 3 like full weeks with her.
It was so perfectly timed.
So
you got to do everything all together. You had your cousin's wedding. Yeah. It was like cousin's wedding, Noemi. My wedding, Noemi.
Yes.
You became an aunt.
I'm an aunt. Auntie
You're an
Breenie.
aunt. An aunt, not an aunt. An aunt.
An aunt. But then when people say it back to me, sometimes I like get confused and I don't know which one I say anymore.
It's interchangeable, I think.
Yes.
It depends on like your inflection, how you're feeling.
Where you're from.
The day.
How am I feeling?
Yeah. Because it's kind of, when you're like all jazzy and you're like kind of being a little rebellious, maybe it's like, oh, Aunt Sabrina's coming.
Yeah.
But it's like when you're there to just be
Proper.
A perfect caretaker and you come with all of your gifts.
Yeah.
And you're there to be the night nurse. Your aunt.
Auntie
Sabrina.
Auntie Breenie.
Auntie Breenie. So cute. She's a little doll. She literally looks fake.
Yeah. Yeah. She's so cute.
She's
just like
incredibly
so
small.
I would just stay awake with her on my chest.
Yeah. Oh.
Little so sleeping baby with her little coos and her little poos.
So little coos and poos.
Yeah. But amidst all of that excitement was even more excitement. It was the wedding of the century.
I got married.
You got married. You're an old maid.
I'm a wife.
A wife for life.
I'm an old maid. I'm off the market.
We now speak like this.
Everyone can unfollow me on social media.
We are old women.
I shed a tear for my lost relationship with Bigfoot.
Well,
it's gone.
Bigfoot hasn't given up hope. I spoke to him last night.
What did he tell you? Did you channel him? Sabrina, you did that so intense. I wish I was filming your face.
You were.
No, but like right here, because you're whatever this like your water line. Yes, it, like, flipped open almost, like, your eyes got so
Bigfoot had
full.
to come say what he had to
Bigfoot
say.
was oh my gosh, that was
Speaking
great.
through me.
You would win the competition, I think.
Thank you.
We did not have Bigfoot at the wedding, but what we did do was get married at this amazing resort
So
called Basin
freaking
Harbor.
cool.
It's on Lake Champlain, and it was very perfect for me and Brian because I grew up on Lake Champlain boating just around there and across the lake. At that part of the lake, you are so close to New York.
Yeah.
Some of our friends quite literally canoed over there
Yep.
and had beers and picnics,
And you thought they died.
and I thought they died. I was very, very emotional. I was like, "Number 1 rule of being on the lake, you have to tell people how long you're
Yeah.
gone for." So I was panicked, but it was a great time. But Brian's family has a cabin over in the Adirondacks, so we got basically
Yeah.
buried right between where I grew up and where he would summer sometimes.
Yeah.
And it was just really, really lovely. And all of our vendors were incredible. Everyone was incredible.
It was so
So,
well planned.
thank you.
Hats off
Thank you. We had
to
a welcome party and we hired the Tenderbellies, who I went
I
to
didn't know that you went to high school with
high
them
school with. Yeah, I mean,
until
one of them was
you
a
told
grade
me last
above
time.
me, and then a few people were a few grades above
Okay.
that. It was, like, all scattered, but they're
But still,
extremely
yeah.
talented. Yeah, Friday was awesome, and then Saturday also all of I told you this already, but I'm gonna, like, compliment you and everyone else at the wedding. Our vendors, so many of them came up and were like, "This is the best group of people we've ever served. Everyone is so cool and normal." And I was like, "What are you normally seeing at
Yeah.
weddings?"
I will say though, like, on this journey of like trying to feed my inner child and heal her and have fun and enjoy life more, I had so much fun at your wedding
Good, I'm
to the
glad.
point where I was laughing so hard that I peed my pants.
Yes,
And
you
I showed
did.
you. You didn't believe me. And I was like, "Look,
It was full pee.
full pee."
You, like, actually like, you actually peed your pants.
I was laughing so
I was
hard.
expecting, like, a little dribble. Like, it was I
My
was like,
my
"You need
shorts were
to
wet.
you need to go change your pants."
So this was, like, at the after party, and people have seen the video. Corinne and I are running around
Yeah,
the
we had a
fire like
colossal
witches.
bonfire
It
outside
was
of the Red Mill
amazing.
Tavern, which was a
Right.
a bar
So I
that
had
had
already
music and stuff in
changed.
there too.
So I had my, like, little
Yeah.
shorts on and then the
The shirts that I
adorable
embroidered
shirts,
on Campfire Stories that everyone was watching me, like, diligently work on for, like, 3 weeks.
which, like, I know you don't have time, and it was really, really hard work, but you could start a massive side
Everyone kept
hustle.
saying that. So many people got DMs too
Yes,
from their
I got
shirts
DMs,
being like,
yeah.
"Where did you buy those?" And my cousin Mallory was super jazzed about the idea of me making a business, and I was like, "I will never do
Yeah.
this." So if someone else has an embroidery machine and wants to start doing well, maybe I will. You know what? Hold on. Maybe I'll get an embroidery machine. If I have a machine doing the embroidery
Yeah,
piece,
then you can do
I'm
it
super down to thrift a bunch
because
of
you
dress
really
shirts.
yeah, it was great.
I was
They're
into it.
beautiful. But
You peed
anyway,
your
I peed my
pants,
pants.
and it
Mhm.
was so many people were talking about how wonderful, and I was just really happy that because obviously, like, weddings, it takes a lot of money and time for people to get to places, especially in Vermont. It's not just easy to travel to.
It also takes a lot of money and time to plan it.
It does, but I was just very happy that everyone felt so good about the wedding that people are already, like,
Yeah,
planning annual trips back to that location, and
so
people
beautiful.
extended their stay on either end like you
Yeah.
did too, and it just made me feel really good about it, and everyone kept saying it was, like, healing and, like, adult
It
summer camp,
was.
and it felt really good because Brian and I were like, "Okay, it's our wedding, but we also just want it to feel like all of us are basically at adult summer camp
It
together."
was,
Like,
and
we're
it was
living on a
that.
commune, it's not really about us. The only
But it
part
was
about
about
us is, like,
you.
you watch us for 30 minutes, and then we pay for you for your whole
But
weekend to eat
you
and
brought
drink.
all of us together, and I think that says so much
Yeah.
about you and Brian as a couple, is that not only are you surrounded by good people, but you brought together good people. Like,
Yeah.
you are good people that speak to good
It does
people,
say a
that
lot about
attract
people
good
who yeah,
people.
everyone was amazing, and it was,
Yeah.
like, perfectly blended, everyone on Brian's side and
Yeah.
our side.
Everyone
Our
got
side.
along our
We're
side
getting
because 'cause we're getting
married.
married. We
It
are.
was awesome,
We were
and you
married
weren't the only
first.
one who peed. There were 2 other people who peed their pants. It was
Yeah.
just such a fun time,
It was a pee
everyone
your pants
you
festivity.
couldn't step away from the fun.
Yeah.
You
Can
really
you
couldn't.
talk about the beautiful sleeves for your dress on Friday night?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
My mom so a few years ago, she almost trashed her wedding dress by pouring fake blood on it to wear it for Halloween, and I was like, "Hold on. Wait a minute. Let's pause on that." And she's like, "That's true, that's true. You might want to use this."
Mhm.
So we chopped off Kim chopped off, our friend/seamstress, chopped off the '80s puff sleeves and lace sleeves from my mom's
So cool.
'80s wedding dress, and I wore them Friday night to
Yeah.
the welcome party.
So there's pictures on our
Mhm.
Instagram people can see.
Yeah.
You looked stunning the entire
Thank you.
weekend.
I also wore I never took a picture of it, but when I got engaged, my mom I cried so hard when she did this, like, that day, when she came, she gave me this charm. It's this little gold heart with a tiny, tiny little speck of a diamond in it, and it was
Mm.
the very first piece of jewelry my dad ever gave her, and she gave it to me, so I wore it
Oh,
on
so
I, like, looped
sweet.
it to this bracelet and wore it, and that made me feel really good to have that too.
Ah,
Yeah, and my actual favorite part of well, it's not my favorite part of, like I have 2 favorite parts of, like, the actual planning
okay.
process, and one was
Which is
collecting
insane, but yes.
antique bells.
Oh,
For, like, a year, we collected by we, I mean me, collected
yeah.
antique bells and also, like, brass candlesticks, but the antique bells
Yeah.
to put on some of the rows of the front of the ceremony, and so then when we kissed and we, like,
And
walked back
broke
down
the
the aisle.
glass.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, yes, because Brian's Jewish. The glass
Bells.
smashed, it was like, "Mazel tov," and then
And
the
then we
bells,
rang
and it
bells.
was so cool to actually hear all
Yeah.
of the bells because I almost heard the bells more than I heard people cheering, and I
Yes.
loved hearing all of the bells. That made me
It was
super
beautiful.
happy. And I liked thrifting them because now those are our keepsakes. Like, some people have wedding china, we're gonna have antique bells.
I love that. What was your second favorite part?
The creamy truck.
Okay,
The ice cream.
that's the best thing about so I've been to Vermont many times in my life. I've never been to your family home. I've never been with you,
Mhm,
but in the years of my life that I've known you, I haven't been back to Vermont. And you talk so much about it that
mhm.
I had this image of your neighborhood and your like upbringing and stuff that I imagined this like tiny small street with like a bunch of little storefronts and that's where the creamies were like
Was it right?
no, it's so like, where we went to get creamies and I know there's multiple locations,
Yeah.
but, like, it was the middle of nowhere, and I was like, "Wait, it's Vermont is such a big, small town
Yeah.
that everyone knows each other."
'Cause you stopped at Cookie Love, and you brought me and Brian chocolate chip cookies on the way
Yeah,
from
of course,
Burlington
and I got
to Virgins.
Brian a wonderful,
Oh my
wonderful
god.
wedding present.
Brian was like, "Oh," and me and my parents were dying laughing. Sabrina comes and she goes, "Brian, I got you a gift. Well, it's mostly for Corinne, but it's also for you." And hands us 2 chocolate chip cookies and then a present for Brian, and he opens it up, and it it says
They're boxers.
"Sass Crotch" on the boxers.
Has he worn them yet?
No, no. I think I'm probably gonna
You
wear
might
them.
wear
They might
them.
be, like, my
Yeah,
bedtime pajamas, but what made it even better was that you got it locally at a store,
I
which
did.
doesn't make any sense why they would have that in, like, downtown Virgins, but
Why
it
not?
it felt very serendipitous that you stopped
Yeah.
in a store, got the Bigfoot Sasquatch boxers,
Uh-huh.
and then traveled another 10 minutes to the lake where Champ is
Lake
often
Champ.
seen, but we didn't see him.
Well, we don't know yet. You haven't gotten all your photos
Didn't get
back
all the
yet.
oh,
What if Champ is,
our
like, poking his
photographers
little head out
could
in
not
one
have
of the
been better.
photos?
Did you know that they were a couple? They're a husband and wife?
I did, you told me.
Oh, yeah.
I
I'm
loved
obsessed with
my
them.
favorite thing so tell them about the boat.
Oh, so after the ceremony, we walked down I've already posted so many pictures, but I, like,
And it was
literally wanna,
so
like, post, like, a
yeah.
play-by-play, like, "Here's the photo, and here's where we did."
Yeah.
But we walked down from up top by the main launch that, like,
Mhm.
overlooks the lake and the bay, or the little marina, and we walked down towards the front of the water to the dock, which is where cocktail hour was, but Brian and I turned left as everyone else turned right, and we got on an old vintage Chris Craft boat, and we went off and went over to the cliffs of New York with our photographers and took photos over there, had, like, a 20, 30-minute break
To
to
just
just, like,
you.
be
Yeah.
together. It was kind of photos, but it was also mostly us just sitting in the boat, like, relaxing together, being
Right.
taken around, and then we were driven to cocktail hour on the
On the boat.
boat, and the guy who's driving the boat, he's like, "We're gonna go past cocktail hour." It's like, "Great," and then he's like, "And I'll drop you off." The boat goes so fast past the dock. We're waving, everyone's cheering. We're like, "Woo!" And then he goes, "Okay, we'll do it again." I was like, "We have to pass everyone again?"
We all were like, "Again, again, again."
"Oh, did
We
you?"
all wanted to like, we wanted you to come back around.
Oh, 'cause I
The
was
crowd
I
wanted
was
more.
mortified. I was like, everyone has to stare at me again," and then he went really slow the second time,
Oh,
and I was like, "Ugh, ugh," but it
it was
was
worth
super
it.
fun. It was
And
very
what
beautiful.
I loved is about your photographers is that the woman was in the boat on the ground taking photos of you guys
And then
as
the
you were
other
waving
photographer
to
was on
all
a
of us.
second boat
Yeah.
taking pictures. Yeah. Yeah, she was huddled down, Sarah and
Dedicated
Peter,
to the
City
craft.
Lux. They're so great. And then also, I have to give props to Basin Harbor because they were just an incredible venue. Like, it was just so perfect, like a 3-day long wedding with all of these events. It was incredible. But one of the things that they did that I didn't realize they were doing that was so lovely was when we got off the boat, 2 of the people that were working the wedding were there with all of the hors d'oeuvres and 2 signature drinks for both of us
Oh, that's
and
so
just stood with us for
nice.
like 10 minutes,
So you
letting us
could
drink and eat and try all of our stuff before they knew we would go and
be
inevitably
busy.
not be able to eat or try anything as we're talking to everyone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really
So I was
smart.
really happy about that. I was like, "Oh, I actually do
It
get to
was
try all the food." The food was so good.
it was
That
really
was very
good.
surprising. Not that it was like
It was
but it
delicious.
was like it was way better than wedding food normally is. I was shocked by it. It
I
was
loved it.
delicious.
Yes.
I don't even think of this event as my wedding. I think of it as like we
Adult
just
summer
got
camp.
yeah. It was described to us too as dirty dancing set on Lake
And
Champlain,
it
and we were like,
was that.
"Sign us up."
It was
So it was
beautiful.
wonderful.
It was a stunning, stunning event. You planned it what?
And we met phantoms.
Okay, you know what? I was just gonna say, it's so funny because you, in our history of podcasting, have been seen by phantoms or met phantoms far
It's like
more
one a
in
year.
person, but the fact that even at your wedding, that still was true, that you ran into phantoms more than I
I saw
did, and we were in the
2 more people
same
than you did.
place. We were in the same place.
There were 2 people well, one person was working well,
So I am invisible.
no. No, you were running around in the photo booth taking feet pics,
I was doing that.
taking pics of your feet in front of the sunset. You were busy.
I was working.
And I was lounging at the bar, so that was the difference. It was easier to capture me. You were so quick.
Capture you.
You were quick.
I was like Bigfoot, you were like a
I was like a
ghost.
lethargic little I don't even know.
Jeff the Mongoose.
You
I
were
don't
like a
know.
little tokolosh running around and, like, tickling people's toes, and I was I was Jeff the Mongoose being
Yeah.
like, "Do you see me? Hello.
Hello.
Hello, give me my snacks."
Okay.
But yeah,
So
so
phantoms.
yes, Sarah is the phantom that I met at my hair appointment. She didn't actually work the wedding, but she was
Yeah.
like, "Oh my god!" And we talked, and I saw her twice. And then the person who actually did our hair was just collecting ghost stories from all of us,
Yeah.
probably to repeat back to
She also
Sarah.
had some good alien
She
stories.
did? I
Yeah,
didn't
you were
know
there.
this.
You literally were sitting there.
Honestly, I was like, "Oh wait, oh I do remember."
Yeah. It wasn't even like it was like a friend of a friend, I think, that
Yeah.
experienced it, but it was similar to something happened and then like Men in Black kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kelsey had some great ghost stories. And then 2 people who worked at Basin Harbor, one who was working, I think, at the check-in desk, and then another person who was working the bar are also 2 phantoms. So, you met the person who was working at the bar because she also came to
But
the after
she
party.
okay, your dad introduced me to the woman at the bar, and she did not seem to know who I was, and then later she really knew who you were, so
But then she also knew who you were at the after party.
but and then
I'm gonna blame maybe my dad was just awkward.
maybe, but then also, remember, you, like, grabbed me at the after party, and you were like, "Look," like, "She wants to get a picture with us." The picture is on my phone.
Oh, here's the thing. We all were consuming libations at that point. And I don't know if she did too, but I can only assume that she also had a few drinks because
Yeah,
she was everyone's favorite
she was.
bartender. People were screaming and chanting her name as she walked into the
Yeah,
after party. She also came up with wasn't she the
the
one that came up with
creamy
the
old-fashioned
yeah, pouring the old fashioned signature drink into
and
the
on top of the
maple
ice cream.
creamies.
Yeah. It
People were
was
pouring
like
their
a
IPAs in
milkshake,
the yeah, so it was
booze
fantastic.
shake.
And then the second evening, you were locked away in a little Mary Shelley-esque fashion, writing
Yeah.
in your cottage, and I went and partied again at
You
the
were the
Red Mill.
cutest.
I got too drunk.
She was so cute.
I don't remember about 90
But you were
minutes.
so happy. You were happy drunk. It was
Yeah.
adorable.
Brian said one of people's highlights out on the lake trampoline was when I gave out awards. I hosted an awards ceremony,
Everyone loved that. I'm
and
sad
I
I missed
asked
it.
what had prompted it, and he said, "Nothing. You just stood up and started doing it." So
Your own internal monologue
there we
prompted it.
go. But that's okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, I had about 30 s'mores and ate 2 dinners, and then I had energy to go out again,
And
and
then
that's when I
that's
met
when you yeah.
the other woman. But you were
Yeah.
yeah, I was like, "Oh, Sabrina's gonna be so upset that she missed you." And also I was not in a great
But you
condition at that
remember
point, so
it, so
apologies to you if you're listening. I'm sure I was probably the stinkiest person I could have ever been.
no. I feel like it okay, I
Yes.
think in summary, if we were to do like a 20-second recap. Corinne is beautiful. Corinne and
I wish I
Brian
could live in
bring
that
home
weekend.
so many or bring together the most wonderful, happy people. Bigfoot
Thank
and
you.
Champ did not show up.
That's great. Yeah, those are the highlights.
I peed my pants. And I started my foot business.
I wish you had the strips right now
Oh, I
of all
have
of your
well, I
photos.
can't show it. I'm gonna sell it.
Oh, okay. That's right.
Honestly, though, I feel
Here's
like
the thing.
I joke about it so much, but I think I'm gonna start a poll and it'll be anonymous.
Well, here's the thing. You joke about it so much that it's gonna become true and people aren't gonna be surprised. Because it's like
Well,
not
because I
it's
want
slowly
it to
becoming
be,
not a joke.
but it's like, okay, here's my
You're manifesting it.
it's I'm
It's like not
afraid.
a joke anymore. Because if
I'm
it were a
afraid.
joke, we wouldn't be able to repeat the joke so many times because then it wouldn't be funny. This is us just prepping. Cat
Meow.
behind the tree.
I know it's under my car. Come here. Come here. Get
It's
in my car. I'll take you
get
home.
in my car. It's us prepping people for what's to come. And let me
Um,
tell you, the poses,
I'm very smart.
you're very flexible.
Flexible.
It took me a long time until I saw the photos again. It took me a long time to realize that it was both your feet and your face in the same frame because I assumed you got someone else to come below and do these odd, you know,
No,
interesting Cirque du Soleil-esque poses,
it's
but
part of
it
the
was all you.
appeal. No, but the
So flexible. You spread your
the
toes too.
I can. I'm gonna interlock my toes together.
You should have done that for one of them.
I think I'm afraid that I start this business and no one wants to buy.
People will, especially if you do like we were just talking about on an encounters that we recorded. Feet and ears, you capture double
Yeah.
because the feet business is oversaturated a bit.
So I need to
But
find a spin
find a
with
spin.
my
Do the thing that I.
feet by my ears.
We're losing our minds.
All right.
It's gonna happen though.
Anyway, your wedding was amazing and incredible, and
Thank you for
our
coming.
podcast is haunted, which is why we are retelling the wedding recap, and you've never heard the first one.
And baby Noemi.
And baby Noemi. Okay, part 2.
Part 2.
Part 2.
So last week we covered the beginnings of colonial Boston, 2 centuries of life and death, a lot of executions. There were pirates, there were ghosts, there were accused witches,
Yeah.
there was moist stew. But this time,
If you don't know what those are, you want to go back to
you
part
want to go
1.
back. But this time we're just going to move a few steps away from Boston Common
Okay.
to another location in Beacon Hill and the surrounding areas of Boston.
Which Beacon Hills, where you lived for a few years in
Yes.
different apartments.
Because for the people of the 1960s, there was a whole new type of danger brought to the Boston residents, and that was a strangler was on the loose. This is a content warning. There is a lot of murder and a lot of sexual assault.
You know that's very tragic. And I don't know why. What?
The cat, there was a car coming and the cat just ran, but then it like ducked behind your car and used it as safety.
So get in. I don't know a ton about the Boston Strangler, but for some reason my mind associates the Boston Strangler with Jack the Ripper. So I always think it's like a more Victorian era
Yeah.
murderer, but it
Well, they're
was
actually compared a
very
lot to each
so
other
maybe
because
that's
it
why.
was there are these really salacious stories where it's like if you're a woman, you're in danger, and it's one person coming after all of these women, and it's like this very scary thing
Yeah.
that happened for a long time. And while there are many reports, spoiler alert, that the Boston Strangler was found, I'm going to present some of the reasons why some people suspect that perhaps who we think the Boston Strangler is and was might be part of the Boston Strangler, but it could be
Oh.
Boston Stranglers.
Copycats.
Copycats, multiple people,
Okay.
a series of unfortunate events.
All right.
So on January 4th, 1964, Mary Sullivan, a 19-year-old woman, was in her Beacon Hill apartment just a few blocks from Boston Common on Charles Street. This was literally a few blocks from where the moist stew had been for quite a long time. She had just moved there a few days earlier from Cape Cod. She was super excited to start her life. She had 2 roommates. She was working as a secretary, so she was brand new to the area and everything looked great and
It was a
lovely for her.
beautiful area of Boston.
It
It's
is
like,
still an extremely
yeah, it's
beautiful.
stunning.
Yeah. She was alone in the apartment. Her 2 other roommates were gone for the evening when she heard a knock on the door. So
Oof.
Mary opened it, and there was a man who hid his true identity. He gained her trust, and he
Oh.
entered her home.
Oh. Oh, so, like, it wasn't just a knock on the door, push inside.
No.
He
In almost every single case, he was let in.
Oh, it's like a vampire.
Mary was attacked. She was raped. She was strangled with 2 of her scarves and her stocking. Her stocking was tied in a bow,
Oh.
and there was a Happy New Year card found between her feet. So it was a very taunting move to the police.
So my question is, how do they know that he was let in?
Well, because I'll
Okay,
tell you.
okay.
Yeah. The killer gained many nicknames over the course of his killing spree: the Phantom Friend, the Silk Stocking Strangler, and what we know him as the Boston Strangler. So Mary Sullivan, she had a maroon blanket draped over her. All of the victims were nude.
Mm.
And for Mary, she had this maroon blanket draped over her. And on the blanket, there were seminal fluids that were left behind by the perpetrator. And this was super huge because Mary was, at the time, they thought she was the 12th victim. She was actually the 13th and final victim, thank God. But there was no evidence in any of the other cases.
Oh,
There were a few items here and there left behind, but
no
they were like
DNA.
cigarette butts, like stuff like that. There was no DNA. There were no clues or indications of who was there. And for the most part, this person kind of came and went unseen. There were a few witnesses that we'll talk about later, but this was really huge. And
Mhm.
DNA evidence wouldn't be widely used for another 20 years after this because this happened in the 60s.
Right.
And we didn't really start using DNA in cases until the 80s. And really, until more recent times, do we have the technology to really run all of these tests?
What's fascinating to me is well, I don't know actually if this is what happened, but the fact that there was seminal DNA left
Yeah.
behind, like, they collected it,
They took multiple samples. I
not
think 4
knowing
samples?
that they would be able to test it like that.
No, I don't know. I don't know if there was, yeah, I'm not sure.
Interesting.
If it was just part of the DNA or if it was, or the part of the evidence collections standards, or if it was this could be coming, like there's
Right.
murmurs, just keep these things because we don't know
Yeah.
what's to come. But anyway, Mary was the final victim, and we now have DNA evidence, and that DNA evidence sat for many more decades. Mary's younger sister, Diane, was 17 at the time when Mary passed, and Diane would be haunted by this crime for decades to come. She would dream of Mary every night. And when Diane got older, she had a child, and her son has been very, very involved in trying to solve the Boston Strangler's
Oh.
identity over the past few years, despite never obviously meeting
Yeah.
his
His
Aunt
aunt.
Mary.
Oh.
Mary was the 13th and final victim. All of the victims were murdered by the Boston Strangler between June of 1962 and January of 1964. So women feared for their lives for 18 or so months. It was horrendous.
13 women in
13
18
women
months. That are known,
that are
right? Like,
known.
there could be more.
Mhm. The
Jeez.
terror began a year and a half earlier from Mary's death. On June 14th of 1962, the very first victim of this string of horrors was Anna Slessers. She was age 55. She was found strangled in her home with a coat belt
Mm.
on the kitchen floor of her apartment. The bathrobe belt, this coat belt, was tied at the end, which would become the signature move. So it was either like a bow or some sort of tie, and he would
Ugh, it's
use
so
what was
sick.
in their own apartment, so he wouldn't bring items with him, he would simply
Yeah.
grab items that were there, which is why he was called the silk stocking
Right.
strangler.
Because he
Or
would use
yeah. 2 weeks later, on June 28th, Mary Mullen was found dead in her home. She would be the Boston Strangler's oldest victim. It wasn't clear if she was a victim of the same killer who took Anna's life, because Mary, she died of a heart attack during her assault, she was
Oh,
so
oh,
scared.
no.
It's so horrible. So she actually wasn't strangled, and so they didn't make this connection until years later that she was likely also a victim of the Boston Strangler.
Hmm. I also feel like early on in, like, strings of attacks like this, I feel like it takes 2 to 3 to really attach or
Choose like a
to be like,
full
"Oh, this is
MO.
a serial killer on our hands." Yeah.
Right, right. And also, yeah, like for the killer themselves, we've heard from many other reports of different serial killers that sometimes they do kind of like they're a little
Evolve.
shaky and whatnot in what they do. And then after a few, it becomes a bit more of a standard. So
Yeah.
she was 85 years old. So the first victim was 55, Anna, and then Mary was 85. 2 days after Mary's death, then Helen Blake, 65, and Nina Nicola, 68, were both found deceased on June 30th. And this basically sent everyone into a panic. They became very aware that there was a phantom strangler on the loose, that this was a serial perpetrator.
It's wild how so there are 13 victims in
Mhm.
18 months, but 4 of them happen in the first, like,
Yes.
month.
Yes. And this kind of happened a lot. So it would be a bunch of people in this short period of time, and then there would be months of silence. And then he'd strike again and murder a few people, and then a few months of silence. It was quite bizarre. And none of the people were related to each other that were victims either. So
Yeah,
it
so it's
wasn't
like,
like two
how do we
roommates
connect to
or anything
them?
like that. It was always a single one-off event in succession, and some of them in the same day.
It's heartbreaking.
A pattern was beginning to emerge, and an unidentified man would enter the home of an unmarried or older white woman, they believed at this time, and he would then attack, assault sexually, and strangle the women to death using an article of their own clothing. It was believed that middle-aged and elderly women were the only targets at this point in time, which we know to not be true later on.
Mhm.
But in the case of Helen Blake and presumably others, some of the drawers of their desks and of their bureaus would be ransacked basically. So he would whoever this perpetrator was, he would go through all of their belongings. He'd go through their jewelry drawer. He would line up items to like look at all their watches, and it was weird because he'd like leave some things messy but then kind of
Mhm.
organize and order some other things. So it was very weird, and things would be moved from the bureaus down to the center of the carpets, and it was very clear that the crime was quick, and then he lingered
He
and
spent
spent
time.
time there.
It feels very erratic. I mean,
Yeah.
and then also, like you said, he didn't bring any of his own things there, so he
No.
did rummage through their homes to find stockings or whatever it was.
Yeah, it's quite
Um,
disturbing. It really is.
I'm glad I haven't eaten yet because I feel like I would probably throw up.
This thing is super repulsive.
Very
I'm very sorry. This is like the darkest two-parter Boston horrors. And honestly, the truth is if I covered any other things in Boston, they'd probably be equally as
Yeah,
horrific. Like, there's a
Boston's
lot
pretty
of
dark.
dark history.
Yeah.
What disturbed people even more is that there were no signs of break-ins. So it appeared that these women allowed the man into their home. And so everyone was like, why? How? And how did he continue to be granted entry into these homes? Because everyone was now in a panic, being alerted that there was someone on the loose who was killing people. So who would open a door to
Mhm.
anyone?
If they were
Yes.
afraid.
Right. Women began carrying pepper and ammonia with them. Or pepper spray and
Mhm.
ammonia with them. They packed hot pins in their bags and they purchased tear gas guns. And
Oh.
Boston police told women to lock all of their doors and windows and to never let anyone in unless they positively ID'd the person. So basically, unless you're expecting someone, don't let them in. Unless they identify themselves, don't let them in. So now we can assume that somehow this man was identifying himself because people were not opening the door. So the
Mm.
future victims still thought that this was someone who was supposed to be let in. So it was a bit of a mystery, but we kind
Right.
of figure out after how he did it.
Okay.
The murders continued. Reporter Loretta McLaughlin went to her editor at the Record American and urged them to let her investigate. She was given permission. I don't think easily. I think she really had to fight for it.
Mhm.
McLaughlin and Jean Cole, another fellow journalist, began their work as a team. McLaughlin, an experienced investigative journalist covering medical stories, and Cole, who was known for her expose on nursing homes in the Massachusetts area. So they were both trying to make a name for themselves and had a little bit of experience in investigations.
The fact that back in the 1960s, there was a investigation and an expose on nursing homes, but we still know to this day that that has not
It hasn't really changed.
changed.
It's
And
really
that's not to say
disturbing.
that all nursing homes are bad, but there is a lot of
There's a lot of bad,
A lot
though.
of
There is a
bad,
lot of bad.
a lot of manipulation, and just taking advantage of people in their elderly ages,
Mhm.
regardless of if it's from nursing homes. Like,
It's so sad.
yeah, it's
Even yeah, in-home care, like, it's
mhm.
hard to
Or even
trust
scammers.
people.
Scammers, like,
Scammer yeah.
calling and, like, showing up to, like, people's homes and pretending to be grandchildren, asking for money.
Did you watch one of the recent episodes of Ghosts where the ghost
No,
gets
I
scammed by
haven't.
the Nigerian prince?
No.
Oh.
I haven't I'm not caught up.
Oh, oh.
I'll have to
They
watch.
succumb to the email scam, the
Mm,
classic email scam. It's a funny episode.
okay.
Okay, so these 2 journalists, they begin to conduct an investigation, and they begin to construct their evidence and the timeline of events. And also, let me back up for a second. If
Mhm.
anyone saw, I think it's on Disney Plus, there is a series. It's fictionalized, but it's based on these 2 women, and it's from their perspectives
Oh,
and all of their involvement in the investigations, and I believe it's on Disney Plus. I think it's called The Boston Strangler. I didn't
on
watch
Disney
it.
Plus? That feels, like,
I know.
off-brand.
I'm pretty sure it is. On August 19th, 75-year-old
Oh,
Ida
sorry, I just had an idea for Disney.
oh,
Instead of Disney Plus, it should be Dark Disney, and that's, like, a
ooh,
whole, like,
Disney at dark.
Disney at dark.
It's like Nick at
Disney
Night.
in the dark.
It's Nick at Night. We
But it's
we
for
want Nick at Night
Disney?
back, but, like, creepy. Okay, so on August 19th, 75-year-old Ida Erga was another victim. She was the next victim.
Mhm.
And so we're gonna put a photo if you're watching on YouTube, and this photo is of McLaughlin and Cole on site at Ida's murder. So they went on site to investigate and collect all
Oh.
of the evidence.
I
Uh,
really love old photography.
yeah, it is incredible. And they're in their heels and their loafers and their dresses and going to investigate a gruesome and grisly murderer.
I love women.
Me too. A day later, Jane Sullivan, aged 67, was the next victim. But then there was a break. September came and there were no murders. So it was all June through August. September, nothing. October, nothing. November, crickets. This gave police time to mobilize, creating new procedures and better communication between 6 different task forces that were now created to help find this killer because
Mhm.
again there were so many like local little hubs of police and these were happening all over. It was like
Right.
Beacon Hill, it was Fenway, it was Cambridge, it was all over the place. But just as these investigators were starting to get their footing, the killer struck again. Only this time, this phantom strangler murdered Sophie Clark. She was a 20-year-old Black student at Carnegie Institute of Medical Technology. She was assaulted. She was strangled with a pair of stockings in the foyer of her apartment on December 5th. And
Jeez.
so now we know that it was not just older white women, it was any woman. And this was so scary to know that regardless of your age and regardless of your race, you could be the next victim.
Mhm.
And if he was willing to expand like that, who's to say that he wouldn't expand to just all people?
Yeah.
So everyone was super panicked. Not that they weren't panicked before,
Mhm.
but now there was a much larger demographic of people who were extra concerned for their
Yeah.
own safety. New Year's Eve, 23-year-old Patricia Bissett was killed. Investigative journalists McLaughlin and Cole had been working on an investigative series which began publishing in January of 1963, so right after all of these murders.
Mhm.
These 2 women, they put a magnifying glass on the entire investigation. They were super meticulous in their work. They would reconstruct all of the crimes. They would describe the scene. They would try to get into the psyche of the killer, try to profile him. They were dissecting police investigations. Their voices were heard loudly because they were screaming. They were trying so hard to tell everyone what was going on and to warn women of
Yeah.
what was happening and to give them the details to help them protect themselves. They also exposed the Boston Police Department for their mismanagement of these cases, providing false information to press and their
Mhm.
lack of communication and cooperation with other law enforcement agencies. So they were like, okay, here's all of this horrific
Yeah.
information. And also, the people who are supposed to be protecting you are doing a lot of things wrong, and we're going to tell you about it.
It's also I feel like during this time, like, a lot of these policemen, it's all men, investigating
Hmm.
these cases, and I love that there are these 2 women who are, like, doing everything they can to collect everything
Yes.
and investigate themselves, and that's also putting themselves in the direct in even more danger
Yeah.
than
Oh my gosh.
anyone else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was so easy for people to dismiss them. And unfortunately for them, it did eventually happen.
Yeah.
While we can all imagine all the good that came from the exposure that these 2 women were doing, it did muddy the waters a little bit because these detailed reports were so detailed. It went into extreme detail about each victim, telling things like what they did for work, what their normal day in the life was, what their hobbies were. They would write about the murders, the timelines, the time they were killed, what was found with them, what was on them, what they looked like, their cause of death, the clothing that they were wearing, the items in their home, so many details.
Mm.
And so this gave the public one, it warned women appropriately for what to expect and what they well,
Yeah.
expect is the wrong
Right.
word,
To
but
look
like
out for.
yes, exactly. But
But
at the
then
same time, they enabled anyone who wanted to give a
uh
false confession to have all of the details.
but they also it sounds like, and I think this is one of the major issues with true crime these days, is the focus and emphasis is on the murderer, the
Mhm.
perpetrator, than on the
Instead of on the
victims.
victim.
And based on what
It
you were
was
just saying,
nice.
it sounds like it talks a lot about these women and their stories prior to being murdered and
Yes.
attacked.
It reminds me a lot of what Sarah Turney's doing now
Yeah.
for true crime. I was watching a TikTok that she'd posted the other day where it was like a funny little one where
Mhm.
there was some audio and it was like her giggling every time she changes the name of a case from the murderer's name to the victim's name, like the case of
Ugh,
because you
gosh.
learn the victim. Like, why give more of a voice to
To the killer.
the
Yeah.
killer?
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically that was their intention and that was their thought, these women, but unfortunately it would potentially lead to some misdirection and
False
misuse
confessions.
false
Yeah.
confessions and like diverting the police's attention to people that weren't actually the perpetrator. And so that was scary.
Yeah.
It became clear that from these reports and other articles written by fellow investigators that this murderer was what a lot of people thought at the time was a single person, not a duo or a group, and that they targeted women who were put together, established, respected, and self-sufficient. Although I will say there was one group of people who were saying that, and then there was a lot of other people that were saying this has to be more than one killer.
Mm.
This perpetrator would sexually assault people. They would leave this part of the attack, quote, particularly incomplete at a lot of the scenes. So,
Hmm.
despite the seminal fluid being collected in the last case, it would seem that that was a small piece of whatever was motivating this person. So, it was a little bit confusing because it
That
seemed
is.
sexually motivated, but the sexual piece of it wasn't completed
Was
always.
it, or did they just not have, like, they didn't leave the evidence behind of it
Perhaps there
being
was that.
completed?
Yeah. He also, like I was saying, spent a lot of time postmortem just exploring their home. So that was also
Mm.
an interesting thing. And it's not like he was necessarily stealing stuff, at least from what I was reading. So he was just rummaging through everything and observing and probably
Ugh,
fantasizing grossly about what these people's lives were like.
gross.
McLaughlin was actually the person who gave the killer the moniker the Boston Strangler. And Cole and McLaughlin were not driven by a desire to leak gruesome details or
Right.
bother police, but rather to warn the women of Boston. They were also female journalists who were fighting to have their work respected. And for a really long time, both of these women, everything that they would publish, it would come with a headline that said, Girl Reporter Says, and then whatever they were reporting on. So,
You know how, like, mic drop is usually like a I just said something, like,
yeah,
that blew your mind? I wanna, like, throw this.
Mike Throw.
Mic throw
Mike
for,
Throw.
like
Yes. It is so infuriating, and they had never made headline news before, basically, like, everything that they wrote in, it like, nothing was front page, it was all,
Yeah.
"Girl does this, girl says this," and it was ridiculous, and
Well,
so they put so much energy and time and thought and care into releasing all of this information. They actually published 29 articles in just 1 month about everything,
you know
and
what
this
this
did help the trajectory of their career. They were taken seriously after that, but the fact that it took this to be
yeah.
taken seriously is
Well,
disgusting.
it reminds me of, and I think I've said this on the podcast before, but when my mom bought her current home, on the contract, it says Aurora Giannaroga, an unmarried woman.
It does?
Yeah.
Maybe you did say this
Yeah.
before. What in the world? Does it say that for men?
No.
An unmarried man?
Nope.
Oh, what the fuck?
I know.
Disgusting.
Mhm.
Ugh, okay.
Yep.
So, despite publishing 29 articles with wildly accurate information and exposing some of the Boston police's misdoings, They were basically prohibited from sharing and writing anything else because
Mm,
it did begin to hurt the investigation with just giving too much information to copycat killers, to people who want to have false confessions. So it was just too great of detail to leak to the public.
right.
So they wanted only the real killer to know what happened.
Which is common that they, like, leave certain details
Yeah.
out of the press in order to use it to know that they've caught the real.
Yes.
Yeah.
True. Things escalated in 1963 with the attack and murder of Mary Brown, aged 69. On March 6th, 1963, Mary was attacked by this killer, and this time a new weapon was introduced. She was stabbed multiple times,
Mm.
though she did die of strangulation. So that's why we
Oh,
know, or it was suspected, that this was still
yeah.
attributed to the Boston Strangler. 2 months later, on May 6th, Beverly Simmons, age 23, she was attacked in the same way. She had, in a similar fashion, clothes around her neck, but she died of stabbing.
So it's either someone replicating, like copying and doing their own thing, or it's the killer evolving and trying new
Escalating.
things. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I wrote. I was like, I don't know exactly if these two people can be attributed to the Boston Strangler, and what we've no way of knowing because there was only evidence, DNA evidence,
Mm.
for one person. So even if he had been, which he wasn't, convicted of Mary Sullivan, the 13th victim's murder, he wouldn't have been able to be tried for the other 12, basically. Evelyn Corbin, age 58, would be murdered on September 8th. Joanne Graff, age 23, would be killed November 23rd. And then in January 4th, 1964, the final victim, Mary Sullivan.
She was 19, right?
Yeah, she was the youngest. So the oldest was 85, the youngest was 19. Despite the assembly of a major task force known as the Strangler Bureau, the police spent 18 months chasing down this phantom strangler. Though launching this task force did help centralize the resources and help different bureaus work together. So there was some good, I guess, from the police
Mhm.
learning how to interact with one another that
Yeah.
helped for future crime. But for 10 months, there were no new murders and the killings appeared to have stopped. On October 27th, 1964, police were called to the home of a woman who had just been raped. A man posed as a police detective, gained entry to her home, assaulted her, and then apologized to her, and he left. Based on her description of this man, police then arrested this man that they found nearby, Albert DeSalvo, who was working as a handyman.
'Cause I don't know where this is going, but I just don't think that this is the Boston Strangler.
Interesting, because a lot of people don't, but it's kinda convoluted. So Albert DeSalvo, he was the son of an abusive alcoholic fisherman. He began torturing animals at a young age, and it escalated to other crimes. Eventually, he was sent to a reform school and a juvenile detention center. At age 17, he joined the army. A
Hmm.
few months later, he was dishonorably discharged. He then re-enlisted a few years later and was discharged, but
Jeez.
not before marrying a woman, Armgard Beck, who he met during his military stint in Germany. So when they caught him for the rape of this woman, he was initially committed to Bridgewater State Hospital for observation. And with the publication of his photo and news of his arrest, many other women came forward to say that he had also attacked them too in a similar manner. So no one was saying he was the Boston Strangler yet. He was
Okay.
just a serial rapist.
Yeah.
Around the same time, we had the quote unquote green man who would sexually assault his victims, usually while wearing green. DeSalvo admitted to being the green man. So he confessed. He said he broke into over 400 homes and assaulted over 300 women in 4 different states.
It just
Yeah. 4 years before, in March of 1960, DeSalvo had been arrested for breaking into a home where he admitted to being, quote, the measuring man, who was another person on the loose. This reminds me so much of Joseph D'Angelo, who was the original Night Stalker, the Golden
Golden
State
State Killer.
Killer, the
I was just
East
gonna say
Area
that.
rapist, like, or not East Area. Wait, yes.
Yeah,
Yes, he had so many different monikers
because he was all over the place.
and he was doing different types of crimes with the same MO. He
All
was like
over.
3 or 4 different people all at once.
Yeah. And similarly, he was a police officer, then
Yeah.
let go, and then became an officer somewhere else, right? Like, similar patterns.
Scary.
Yeah.
Scary, scary. Okay, so Albert DeSalvo is now saying he's also the measuring man, which was a nickname given to a serial predator who was going door to door throughout Cambridge, Massachusetts, and pretending to be a modeling scout. And once he got inside, he would use a tape measure to get the model measurements and he would grope people. Uh, and he was sentenced to 18 months in jail. He served 11, and then he was released in 1962 for the measuring man incident. And then that, fast forward a few years, he's now the Green Man and getting caught for being the Green Man.
And 1962 is when Boston Strangler started killing.
Yeah,
Okay. So timeline-wise, people could
he was
associate
free.
him.
He
Yes.
had just gotten out of jail, basically.
Okay.
This was a man who had a pattern of burglarizing and sexual assaults, but he had no pattern of murder yet that we knew of. So
Mhm.
it surprised police when, while awaiting for trial for the Green Man attacks, none of them murder, DeSalvo told a fellow inmate at Bridgewater that he was the one who committed all those murders, that he was the Boston Strangler. 300 suspects on the Boston police's radar as potential suspects for the Boston Strangler. DeSalvo was not on that list. So they had no idea. He wasn't, had he not confessed, he was not even in the top 300 suspects, which is odd because he had so many crimes.
Well, so then now yes, that is confounding to me, but then also, who are these other 300 suspects? How did they put that list together? I'm very
Right.
curious about that.
Well, if there's, I can imagine that it would be, I don't know if easy is the right word to use, but if you have 13 different victims, if you put all the men around them, their,
You try to find a connection.
yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
where did they work? Who were their ex-boyfriends? Who were
Right.
their fathers? Who was their landlord? Like, you can easily put together like 15 men around someone who could potentially kill them,
And I
unfortunately.
think this is the scariest part about serial killers. And or I mean, murder is terrifying and awful in any regard, but most times it is crimes of passion and
Mhm.
it is an attack by someone you know. And for these, it does feel very, very random.
It does. It's all bizarre too, and there's some other stuff too that, like, even even the Green Man thing, there's, like, some suspicions that, like, perhaps he wasn't even the Green Man, he was just a guy that, like, loved to falsely confess to things
Hmm.
and wanted the attention, and that was more what he was into, but but it's all convoluted, and I honestly think that he was a strangler, so
You do?
I kinda do. Well,
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay. Well, we can discuss afterwards.
Okay.
My current take right now is no.
No. Yeah, I'm a 50-50. So you
Okay.
honestly, it's so confusing. Okay, so
Okay.
the inmate who he told he was the Boston Strangler to immediately alerted authorities, and DeSalvo confessed to the police, describing details about the victim's apartments that had never been published and confirming the name of a victim whose photo he was shown, a photo that also had not been published. So everyone's like, it must be him, right? But here's an interesting twist. His cellmate, who he confessed to, was George Nasser, who was convicted twice for murder.
Hmm.
He was sentenced to life in prison in 1948 for the murder of Dominic Kermel, but then was paroled in 1962. So he got out right around the time that the Boston Strangler
Okay.
situation started happening. And
Yeah.
then 4 years later, he was sentenced to death, which was later rolled back to life in prison for murdering Irvin Hilton. So
But that's two men.
two men, and between his sentencing was the time that all of the
Yeah.
Boston Strangler murders happened.
I am sure that you could probably apply that to so many other people who are
True.
released from.
True.
Yeah.
So DeSalvo wasn't in jail at the time that the Boston Strangler murders occurred. Neither was George Nasser. He was out on the street. Both of them were. Survivors of the Boston Strangler, because there were some survivors, also did not ID DeSalvo as their attacker, nor the number of eyewitnesses. So Kenneth Rowe, he was an eyewitness. He was an engineering student who lived on the floor above Joanne Graff, who was a victim. He spoke to the Strangler, or he didn't know it was a strangler at the time. He spoke to a stranger who was looking for Joanne just before she was killed. So it can be assumed that that man who didn't actually know where she lived and was in her unit, her apartment building, was the person who killed her moments later,
Which then indicates that he did know her or had been watching for long enough to
probably
know her
watching.
name. Okay.
Yeah. Kenneth was showed a picture of DeSalvo after DeSalvo
Mhm.
had admitted to the crime or confessed. His dark features and prominent nose would be memorable because these were things that you would assume. I mean, here's a picture of him right here, too. We'll show it earlier in the video, but
Okay.
Um, so he was a guy that you would recognize, right? Like, he wasn't super, super ordinary. Like, he had some features that did stick out.
It's so funny because before you said that, I was like, "He's pretty ordinary looking."
But you would know, like, you would be able to say, like, he has thin lips and a, like, large downturned nose, and he's got, like, slicked back dark hair, you
It's
know?
hard because yeah, I would love to think that, but I feel like, most of my interactions with people that I don't know, especially if they're ordinary, if, like, someone
Mhm.
asked me, like, if I was on, outside of an apartment and someone was like, "Hey, like, is so and so there?" And I said, "No," like, I'd move on with my day. If they asked me, like, "Hey, is so and so there? I wanna hurt them," then, yeah, I would, like,
Yeah.
but if they give off no indication of having or no energy put off of them that makes me feel weird, like, I don't know
But
that
if
I
a
would.
few hours later you find out that someone was murdered right down the hallway from you, wouldn't you remember within a few hours likely what that person looked like?
But isn't
Or
our memory the
generally?
least reliable?
It is, you're right.
I don't know, I just yeah,
Okay, well, Kenneth was showed a picture of
and he said
DeSalvo. He didn't recognize him.
okay.
Jules Benz ran Martin's Tavern next to where Joanne Graff's apartment was, and Jules saw a stranger lurking around that day. That stranger, the guy, came into the tavern, kind of like ducked in nervously, was behaving in a way that Jules thought someone was looking for him, someone would be after him. So Jules took note of this guy. So despite Kenneth probably
See,
saying
that
no and
that
moving
is
on,
right, then you would
Jules was
remember.
like, I'm watching this guy, like, something's
Yeah,
weird and suspicious about him." The description of this man was exactly the same as Kenneth's. So the person the same day looking for Joanne was the same person that was in the tavern.
and Kenneth is the one who killed 2 men.
No, 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 sorry, Kenneth is just an eyewitness
Okay,
to
sorry.
Joanne's
Oh,
crime.
oh, oh, okay.
Yes. We're gonna
Okay.
clear Kenneth's name right
Okay,
now.
Kenneth is so
Yes.
sorry.
Kenneth and
Okay,
Jules are the 2 eyewitnesses who
okay, they both
did not
saw
ID DeSalvo.
okay.
Eileen O'Neill saw a man in Mary Sullivan's bathroom. Mary Sullivan is the 13th victim, the final person who died in Beacon Hill. She saw a man up in Mary Sullivan's bathroom window right before the time of her death. She also could not ID DeSalvo as this man.
And you still think Del Salvo is the Strangler?
Well, okay, we're gonna get to. I don't know. I kind of think he's guilty of like. Well, we'll
Okay.
see. Marcella Luica lived in the same apartment complex as Sophie Clark, who was killed. And a man calling himself, quote, Mr. Thompson, who said he was a painter, had come to paint her house and was asking to gain entry. So this is now how we suspect he gained entry was because with all the other crimes, he was a model scout with a measuring tape. He was a painter. He
A
was there to
police
check he
officer.
was a police officer. So he was posing as other people to gain entry. And some
Yeah.
people say that he also had a knife on him to gain entry. To basically was
That
like
would make
threatening and
yeah.
then the door is
See,
opened.
that feels more believable to me. It feels like whatever disguise they were using was more for anyone else who possibly could have seen him,
Yeah,
because if some man showed up at my door, regardless of the time, like, I can't imagine painters were just knocking on your door randomly being like, "Hey, I'm here to paint your place," if you and, like, you'd be like, "Yeah, come on in."
true. I'd be like, "Who the fuck are you?"
I didn't ask
I
for a
already say
painter.
that. I'm
Yeah.
like, "What?"
Yeah.
And let me call someone first. Actually, I don't answer. I just hide.
Yeah,
I lay
same.
down on the floor and don't
Pretend
breathe
I'm not
for 10
there.
minutes,
Yeah.
which apparently is a millennial thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so Marcella, she said that this man who came to her home as a painter that she did not let in was 5'9". He had honey colored hair, an oval face, and was likely around age 25. So this is totally not at all what this guy looks like. She told him, this guy, the painter, Mr. Thompson, that her husband was asleep in the apartment. And so this man left without trying to get in.
Hmm.
As we know, he did gain access to an apartment in that building moments later, and it was Sophie Clark's. And then she was killed.
So this is what's confusing to me because Kenneth said he heard like the man had asked about Joanna, right?
Joanne. Yeah.
Joanne. And that indicates that the Boston Strangler was watching and had pre-planned and premeditated which person he was going to attack. But then this version of events or story of events like indicates that he randomly chose.
Well, we don't know necessarily because what if he was watching that whole apartment complex and he knew that there were a few people that he could potentially
Right.
murder, because there were some people that he killed on the same day too. So, like,
Right.
he could have been planning on
Yeah.
multiple, or, in an unfortunate series of events, perhaps he was leaving and then he saw
Sophie.
Sophie walking
Yeah.
into her apartment and took the risk not knowing if anyone else was in
Yeah.
there, right? So there's another survivor. So Marcella survived by basically saying that someone else was in her apartment, which was not true. A
Yeah.
man was in her apartment already. Gertrude Gruen is another person who survived. She was actually strangled, but she fought so hard that in this, I'm sure everyone fought so hard,
Yeah.
but whatever happened in this one moment, he just decided to flee and to not continue. So he left her
Jeez.
alive. Marcella and Gertrude were brought in to identify DeSalvo, and these women went to the prison visiting room. They were posing as visitors, and they waited for DeSalvo to be brought out. Before bringing out DeSalvo, Gertrude watched George Nasser, the guy who said that DeSalvo confessed to him in prison of these
And George
crimes.
is the one who killed the 2 men.
And George killed the 2 men, yes. George Nasser, DeSalvo's prison buddy, he
Mhm.
enters the room and walks over to a social worker. He glances angrily over in the direction of Gertrude, and she becomes extremely upset, very frightened, and feels that this man, George Nasser, feels extremely familiar to her. DeSalvo comes out moments later into the visiting room. She doesn't recognize him. She doesn't have the same visceral reaction at all. She's never seen this man. She's seen George. She broke down crying, and when she
Mm.
was finally able to speak again, she said when they showed her DeSalvo's picture, like when the police showed her DeSalvo's picture weeks before, she thought that there was some similarities, some similar features. So she thought perhaps maybe it could
Yeah.
be him. But now that she had seen him in person, she did not think so. But seeing George Nasser was entirely familiar. She said, quote, "The first man who entered, George Nasser, I realized how shocked I was when I saw him. To see this man, his eyes, his hair, his hands, the whole
Oh,
expression of him,
the
my deep
physical
feelings
reaction.
are that he had very great similarities to the man who was in my apartment."
Do you have a picture of him? I, like, feel that in my soul, like, "Oh, that hurts so like, yeah, to be attacked like that."
This is him. So he doesn't look that like he and DeSalvo have some
There are some
similar.
similarities.
Yeah, there are
They're
definitely
white
some
men
similar.
with dark hair
Yeah,
and,
and
like,
larger
kind of
noses and
longer
thin lips
faces.
and, yeah, oval
Yeah.
faces. Marcella experienced something similar to what Gertrude did when she saw the 2 men. Seeing DeSalvo, she immediately eliminated him, but seeing Nasser made her heart jump. She said this was him, only now he had dark hair.
Oh,
So was he wearing a disguise? Did he dye his hair? What was the situation? Especially because some people said that he had some, like, light sandy hair,
right.
and now he had
Has
dark
dark
hair.
hair. Okay.
Another notable piece of evidence are cigarettes found at a few of the scenes. A Salem cigarette, which apparently was like somewhat rare. This was not like a cigarette that everyone just smoked.
Hmm.
And these Salem cigarette butts were in Sophie Clark's bathroom toilet and also next to Mary's bed. But there was no, I don't think they were collected as like DNA evidence.
Right.
But DeSalvo didn't smoke. I think George Nasser did. I'm not positive, but we just
Mm.
know that DeSalvo, at least in his regular life and maybe not his alter ego of the murderer, didn't smoke. But that's not to say he didn't smoke when he
Right.
was killing.
Right, because that could be his, like, I mean, one of many terrible things.
Police began to speculate that perhaps Nasser was pinning these murders on DeSalvo. Perhaps he fed him some of the information that was told back to them. Maybe he was taking advantage of him. Or there were theories that they two together were the Boston Stranglers. They basically had done it together, somehow were in the same cell as each other.
But didn't they meet after the fact?
Well, there's 2 camps, so it's either, like, they were already doing this together and then they just so happened to be cellmates at Bridgewater, or that they met at Bridgewater and then now they're conspiring together to get and split the $10,000 reward for turning in the Boston Strangler.
Interesting, 'cause, well, also, especially if Del Santo De Santo?
DeSalvo.
DeSalvo, making up words. Especially if Del Salvo why am I saying
Day
Salvo? De
Yeah,
Salvo.
just it yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, especially if De Salvo is maybe taking ownership for other crimes
Mhm.
and what's his name?
George Nasser.
Nasser knows this, he could be like, "Hey, will you take the fall for
Right.
this as well?"
Right, right, right. Yeah. It is interesting because so many people didn't believe that DeSalvo did it at all, and George Nasser seemed like much more of an aggressive. It's weird because it's like there's all these crimes that appear to be DeSalvo's. there's no DNA evidence for him being the Green
Mhm.
Man, but he was ID'd by many people when his picture was posted. But as we're seeing right now with him versus George Nasser, like, they look pretty similar too.
Yeah,
So it could be something weird and he's into confessing to these things. But
right.
forensic psychiatrist Dr. Ames Roby served as a defense witness and claimed that DeSalvo was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Dr. Roby's professional opinion was that he wasn't the strangler. DeSalvo just merely wanted attention and was struggling with mental illness.
Hmm.
FBI profiler and criminologist Robert Kessler believed that there was more than one killer. Based on the changing MO and the various other details, it seemed like it didn't really fit the psychological profile of just one person. There were too many variables, too many variances in the crimes. So there had to be at least two people working together, if not a larger group.
Which we know isn't necessarily true, especially with Golden State Killer case. Like,
Yeah. Hmm.
there can be variations of crimes and still be the same person.
Hmm. Right. But like we're saying that now, having witnessed what the Golden State Killer had done
Yeah.
with all of the evidence coming out 3, 4 years ago. But even if we were having this conversation when we first started the podcast, when the Golden State Killer wasn't caught, we probably would have been like, it's definitely different people.
I don't know.
Yeah. So also when DeSalvo confessed and confirmed all the details and ID'd that photo of the victim that had never been seen, when that was looked at more closely, it appeared that some of the details he had were actually wrong in the beginning. And only when he spent more time with the police and being interviewed did he start giving correct information. So he
Mm,
was basically being fed the correct details,
right.
or he was making
He was
inferences too based on what he knew from reading about the
he was,
articles.
like, course correcting to match it.
Yes, and I did read too that the woman he ID'd on the photograph, I believe a different photo of her was published, so he could have just recognized simply her as a human being,
Hmm,
not
okay.
necessarily the exact same photo, or he was fed something.
Yeah.
So people started to speculate that maybe he wasn't the killer. Attorney F. Lee Bailey, who was also the attorney later on for O.J. Simpson, was introduced to DeSalvo through George Nasser. He argued for DeSalvo. He represented him. He argued for DeSalvo in the Green Man trials because he wasn't tried for Boston Strangler, right? Like he was on trial for Green Man and just said that he was also the Boston Strangler.
Yep.
So he was tried for the Green Man trials, and his attorney, F. Lee Bailey, what he was trying to do was to get the jury to basically get him the insanity plea and to have him sent to a hospital.
Because he had already pled guilty. So it was
Yes.
more for just, like, what the charges would be and what
Yeah,
his yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So he was like, help him understand why he does this, why he assaults these women. He's ill. He had a horrible and violent childhood. And he also tried to convince the jury without actually saying anything, just inferring that DeSalvo was also the Boston Strangler to kind of help with the case of insanity, referencing the crimes multiple times and calling them, quote, 13 acts of homicide by a completely uncontrollable vegetable walking around in a human body.
Okay. So it's not even the Boston Strangler case, and his attorney is basically
Saying he's the Boston
saying he's the
Strangler.
Boston Strangler.
Yes. Yes.
Cool, okay.
DeSalvo is sentenced to life in prison for the Green Man assaults
Mhm.
and robbery.
Yeah.
The jury didn't find it convincing that a man who was so out of his mind and what like
Possessed.
possessed
Yeah.
and ill would still have the presence of mind to wear gloves during the attacks of the Green Man
Yeah. There's
and
thought in that.
to be super weary of leaving behind evidence. Yeah, because obviously he was thinking about things.
Mhm.
So he again was never ever tried for the crimes as the Boston Strangler. He went to jail as the Green Man until his death. He was killed not long after by someone in prison. It's speculated that DeSalvo admitted to these crimes because he believed either that he would get a cushy life at a mental hospital or by IDing himself as a serial killer, he'd become world famous, which would surely bring in money deals, which would then help support his wife and children that he left behind by being in jail. So he was like, I'm already in jail, may as well make them some money and set them up.
Isn't it like the Bundy case where his dad was not allowed to keep any of the money he made off of, like, writing that book?
Oh, probably.
I think it went all to the victims' families.
As it freaking should, because there was a
Yeah.
son. I don't know when the son of Sam Law was put into. Well, I didn't realize that it extended to someone's family members, because the son of Sam Law is basically like you
I think
can't
they sued
profit.
specifically.
Okay, Yeah,
Yeah.
because this was before, so, like, DeSalvo doing this was before the Son of Sam
Yeah.
law came into consideration or was enacted because basically before, as we saw with, like,
With the clown guy.
I was yes,
Just
J J
just clown guy
that
because
clown guy that clown guy, he
was
he would, like,
selling
sell all of
his
his paintings and whatnot. So
yeah.
now it was like, you cannot profit if you are a convicted
Yep.
felon, like, off of your own story, basically, and the
Right.
deaths and the crimes that you have John Wayne Gacy,
Thank you.
that's his name.
Yeah.
Okay. His wife never thought he was capable of being the Strangler. So many of his friends, like, so many people did not think he was capable of being the Strangler. In fact, many people didn't think he was the Green Man either. They were like, "Oh, yeah, he's probably the like, maybe he's the Measuring
Measuring yeah.
Man," but really they were like, "He's a serial burglar. We don't think he's doing all of these other things."
But oftentimes,
Mhm.
those closest to I mean, I think we all have a little bit of a blinder on to people we
Yeah,
love and who are close to us, and we don't wanna believe that they could do these
right.
things.
I mean, another case in Boston that was horrific that happened, what, 10, 15 years ago was the Craigslist killer, and his girlfriend who he lived with could not believe that it was him. But then when she finally was convinced, she had the police help her get to the airport 'cause she, like, refused to go back
Yeah.
to their apartment as she should.
Yeah.
7 years after being convicted, Albert DeSalvo was stabbed to death in a prison infirmary in Walpole Prison in 1973, shortly after recanting his confession and hoping to clear his name for the murders. So he turned around and said, I did not do any of this." On July 11th, 2013, the mystery and uncertainty about DeSalvo's involvement became a little bit less uncertain because police had recovered a water bottle from the construction site where Albert DeSalvo's nephew worked, and they ran the DNA. So they were first trying to figure out, could DeSalvo, now that we have the technology
Mm.
to run this DNA, can we run this DNA basically against his
Family.
family? Because
Yeah.
DeSalvo was already dead at this point. The Boston the Boston Police Crime Lab ran this DNA against the 6 samples of DNA collected from Mary Sullivan's apartment and preserved from
Mhm.
that time. And this was their first step towards trying to figure out if it was DeSalvo. So
Mhm.
the very first thing they did was to make sure the Y chromosomes in the DNA sample were a familiar match. And that if they were, they would then be able to probably take this. Well, their plan was to take it to a judge and exhume DeSalvo's body and then test it against him. So they
Specifically,
couldn't
yeah.
they knew they wouldn't the court order wouldn't probably be granted by the judge if they were just like, "Can we dig up his body and test it
Right.
against the DNA evidence?"
Yes.
So they had to have more reason. So that's why they followed his nephew to the job site and took a water bottle away that he had
Mhm.
chucked out. So there was a match. With this evidence, a judge granted the police permission to exhume DeSalvo's body, test the DNA directly against the DNA found at Mary's apartment on that blanket. They used DNA from his femur and his teeth because he was bones.
Yeah.
It came back as a 99.9% match. So this means that 99.9% of other men can be ruled
Mhm.
out as the perpetrator and that DeSalvo could not be ruled out from considerations. It doesn't mean it was him, but there's an extremely high chance that it was.
So it most likely, from my perspective, he 99.9% killed Mary,
Mhm.
but that does not mean he killed all the
We have
others.
no idea if he killed all the others.
Because while, yes, that followed a lot of
Evidence-wise,
the
we do not. Yeah.
similar patterns,
Yeah, what if he was a copycat
what
killer?
if that's the first time he ever actually, like, killed someone?
Right, and he left
And
behind
he left behind evidence, and he did it in the way that the Boston Strangler did because he didn't have any other knowledge or understanding of how to do it.
right, and he also completed some of the acts that the Boston Strangler hadn't with
Right.
other people.
Or left it behind, yeah.
Yeah, right. Nobody who knew DeSalvo believed he was the killer, so his wife, his family, his friends, his lawyer, his prison psychiatrist, and even the police would fall to the floor laughing when people would suggest that it was DeSalvo when he was alive. He was just a small town thief. He could not be this conniving and skilled murderer. Yet here was the proof, DNA evidence that more likely than not, 99.9% chance that he killed Mary. And I was trying to like, I am not a forensic psychologist and I am not a DNA specialist, but I was trying to research like what is the likelihood.
Of the point one.
Yes, and I couldn't really find anything. It was all coming up with like 23andMe and
I
ancestry.com
almost
and
feel like they have to say 99.9% because there has to be room for some type of error, whether it's like the
yeah.
machine, the cross-contamination, whatever it may be, but otherwise, it's pretty
Yeah.
conclusive.
But it does make me wonder too, what is the chance so, like, if we say 99.9, does that mean if there are, let's say, 99,000 well, I'm bad at
I was like,
math.
"Are we doing math? Because I don't know if this is gonna set us up
Okay,
for
let's say that
success."
there's around 99,000 let's say that there's 100,000 men, right? Does
Okay.
that mean that 99,900 of them are excused and 100 of them left over in Boston could be him? Or is this DNA evidence really specific to it would have to be people living in Boston around this time or in Boston around this time who have, like, these specific markers and these specific things? Like, how
Well,
specific is this
it has to
0.1%
be
that's left
very,
over?
very specific because if you think it's not about location, it's not about place, it is literally about chromosomes and DNA makeup, and the I don't think any like, that's why DNA is such a reliable source in
Right.
crimes because it's so unique.
So that's what I was looking for that I wanted knowledge of, which is like, okay, in Boston, like in a specific location, if someone gets a 99.9%,
There's
like what is the likelihood that there's even one other person in the vicinity that could also get a 99.9?
none.
That's what I was trying to I
Point
was like,
1,
what would
maybe.
there other like if he had a twin brother, I don't know.
Identical twin, it would have to be, and even yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's also I mean, it's interesting because the friends and family saying that they could not believe that he was this conniving, manipulative mastermind,
But they also
but
believed he was a
only a
burglar.
mastermind would be able to convince everyone
True.
that
Yeah,
they are not.
exactly. And yeah, I think it was just so confusing with all the different you said this in the beginning that people aren't reliable witnesses,
Yeah.
and that is true, but at the same time, it was very confusing to have so many unreliable witnesses say that they saw the same thing and it not be DeSalvo. So it's like,
Yeah.
well, aren't they reliable if they're all saying they saw this one specific person, especially George Nasser? That all of their reports are generally the same and it doesn't match DeSalvo or does a little bit, but not completely.
I don't know.
I don't know
This is a
either.
very yeah, I
It's
still
confusing.
despite no, now I'm 50-50. I was before, it's not DeSalvo, but now I'm
Well,
50-50.
DNA evidence says
Yeah.
it is, at
That
least
is
for Mary.
convincing. Yeah.
For
Like,
Mary.
yeah, definitely for
Yeah.
Mary, yeah.
Remember when I said Mary's sister Diane had a son who was very
Yeah,
interested in solving this case? So he was very excited and had a lot of relief come to him and his mom and peace with knowing that DeSalvo had done this to Mary,
yeah.
or that they just knew
There's closure in
there was
some way.
closure. There was
Yeah,
closure. Yes, sorry, I'm struggling with my words and it's sounding awful what I'm saying. But interestingly enough, despite his years of research, DeSalvo was not on his main suspect list either. He had a lot of other people that he thought it could be. So DeSalvo, it was like a surprise for everyone.
wait, I'm surprised though that his name's Casey?
Yeah, Casey.
That he didn't have DeSalvo on the list, especially because DeSalvo had already been
Well, he was on I think he was on a list, but he wasn't not nearly in the, like, top
like, so he
suspects. Like,
wasn't convinced it
he
was DeSalvo
he was
either.
not
Okay,
convinced it was DeSalvo. Yeah, there were
okay,
other people that I think he thought it could be more. I don't know
gotcha.
who that
Yeah,
is. Probably George Nasser. Let's be
yeah.
real.
And then it's also
I think
hard,
George
right?
died a few
Like,
years ago.
you can't I mean, this is the problem with guilty until proven innocent. If
Mhm.
you release the suspect list of all 30 names or 300 names that were on the suspect list, are you then condemning innocent men?
Right. And also, the suspect list doesn't necessarily mean that there's a reason for them to be on the suspect list other than that they just knew or were around the
Right.
vicinity of the
Yeah.
person. Like, if someone died in this backyard that we had nothing to do with, like, fell out
We
of
would be
a
on the
hot air
list.
balloon,
Yeah.
we would be on the list
Yeah.
because we were here.
Yeah. Also, I realized because I just wanted to correct myself here because moments ago, 20 minutes ago, I said that it was Ted Bundy's dad who wrote a book. It was Jeffrey Dahmer's.
Mm.
And he was sued and wasn't allowed to keep any of the profits.
Honestly, good call because I feel like it's one thing if you're like, BTK. I can't remember his name either, but that doesn't really matter, right? I can imagine like, his daughter wrote a book.
Mhm.
And so if you're equally a victim if you're a
But
family member, but it's one thing if you're a family member who's a
Like the
child
child.
or a wife or someone who's a victim in that way. It's another if you're a neglective parent who's trying
Yes, I
to
think that was the
yeah.
issue.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so while there's been no official conviction of DeSalvo, and he was dead for 30 years by the time this DNA was tested, the lawyer for DeSalvo's family says that this DNA evidence collected from the water bottle was obtained illegally, and so the ID collected from DeSalvo's body that was exhumed as the Boston Strangler cannot be said with certainty. It is not something we're supposed to be saying, but it is. That's stupid.
I get that, and
Yeah,
I get it from a legal
right.
standpoint, but from a
From a rule following standpoint,
yes. But then at the same time, it must have been legally approved if the judge used that evidence as to give approval to exhume his body, right? There must be some type of loophole there.
must be yeah, but also
Someone who knows law,
I'm gonna say
what are you gonna say?
Boston and Massachusetts police, they don't have the shiniest reputation.
Do any?
No, but I
I don't
think
know.
that
I don't
they've been exposed a lot for
but
different
there's
things.
okay, 4 to
This is also probably like Whitey Bulger
yeah,
era
yeah,
too, where
yeah.
everyone's in everyone's pocket.
But I was just gonna say, like, for any organization, for humanity, for any species, there's good and there's bad.
Yeah.
Like, the police do a lot of great things as well as a lot of bad things, and there are stories on both sides of that,
Oh,
but,
yeah.
like, yeah, not to say that all of them are bad and not all of
No,
them
no,
are good,
no.
I just now I'm yeah.
But I can imagine and, like, the judges, I mean, there's so much that's
There's
happened
so
in
much
Boston with,
corruption
like
everywhere,
yeah,
yeah.
even, like, the whole thing with, like, the priests and everything in Boston, like, that whole situation, like, there
Yeah.
definitely were some judges, some lawyers, and some people that were high up in, like, government and law that I can
Now we're
see why
distracted,
this
yeah.
would be pushed through.
Yes.
So while we don't know for certain if he committed the other 12 murders, but I think sometimes we can assume, but then other times we get confused, we do know that atrocious crimes like these often leave a wake of sadness behind. And with that comes paranormal activity.
Yes.
One of the Boston Strangler's very last victims, Patricia Bissett, lived at 515 Park Drive. Hundreds of young people, just like Patricia, have also lived in this apartment after her murder
Mhm.
because it's a dorm.
Oh.
This is part of Boston University. So if you go to BU or you plan to, just know it's here and your child could be living there.
Well, just to say, like, we've said this many times, lots of places are haunted.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Lots
have
of
like,
people die
something
people
tragic
die
doesn't
at
have to
home all the
happen.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I feel like anywhere in Boston, if you end up, there's gonna be
There's going to be
there's a chance
something.
of a haunting.
But it is crazy just imagining how many students probably just go to BU and get assigned to this dorm and have no idea what happened in their dorm room.
Yeah.
That's what that's
Yes.
what freaks me out a little bit. So, as part of BU, at the time of Patricia's death, it was housing only theology students, but now I think it's accessible to any undergrad. People who walk by the building feel uneasy, and people who've lived in the building report hearing footsteps in the middle of the night. And some of the students fear that this could be the spirit of the Boston Strangler coming to find one more victim. It's also like
That's, like,
footsteps.
I feel like urban legend to make things a bit
Yeah.
scarier.
And
And then
honestly, I will say all of the paranormal stuff that's happening that's attributed to is this the Boston Strangler? Very likely it's probably not.
yes. Here's the other thing, to go into a more of a spiral. Yes, it's terrifying to be like, "Oh, I you could be living in that dorm and not know what happened, like the death that and the murder that happened in that
Mhm.
place." But then to go one step further, we have a history of murder, taking land from others,
Yep.
of just complete violence and atrociousness that has happened probably on that very same spot,
Yeah.
especially Boston with all the history that it has. Like,
Right.
there's just layers and layers of disturbing things that we don't think about on a daily basis that have happened on the soil beneath our feet.
We literally talked about that in part 1 too. It's like, "Oh, you walk through the park?"
Yeah.
It's horrible what happened in this vicinity in this air.
Yes.
Okay, so we don't know if 515 Park Drive is actually Boston Strangler. It probably isn't. There were murmurs of potentially paranormal activity happening also in the apartment of the last victim, Mary Sullivan, who was murdered in her second-story apartment just steps away from Boston Common. On the first story is a restaurant, which you've been to.
I have?
I feel like I bring a lot of people there. Maybe not. We just probably walked by it 1,000 times,
Okay.
but maybe we didn't eat there. But it's called Paramount or The Paramount. It's very popular. It's like a classic diner breakfast. It's also open for lunch. It's for dinner as well. That was like a weird English sentence that I said. But the Paramount opened in 1937, so it was there and operating when Mary Sullivan was
Oh,
murdered, just above. Like the ceiling separates
yeah.
where she was killed and all of the restaurant workers right below. Which is also like how daring was this person? Well, we know it was DeSalvo for Mary's, like,
Yeah, for Mary.
how brave. Brave is, like, a horrible word to use too, but just, like, the fact that he went somewhere that attracted a lot of people, that probably had a ton of people on the first floor, and still risked being caught by murdering someone who's just above on a
Yeah,
busy street.
yeah,
It wasn't, like, deep in a neighborhood somewhere.
right. I mean, clearly he had no regard about anything else that was going on.
Yeah.
He just wanted to hurt.
True. So this apartment, it is a rental. It's a 1 bed, 1 bath, about 500 square feet with a beautiful bay window and likely nightly nightmares. Just before being murdered in jail, when DeSalvo was in jail for being the Green Man, DeSalvo spent time in the old Salem jail, which you have been to
And covered
and covered.
in early days of the
Mhm.
podcast. Yeah.
So you can check out that episode, whatever it is. So the old Salem jail, which is now turned into an apartment complex in Salem, Massachusetts, um, was where he spent a little bit of time. And residents of this building, who are now living in apartments,
Mhm.
sometimes report a threatening buzz around them and have suspected that this could be DeSalvo's spirit. There are cold spots throughout the building. Items move on their own. Shadows dart across walls. Lights turn on and off. There's a spirit of an old prison guard that has been seen here many times.
Yeah.
He's carrying his clipboard and he's roaming the halls.
Mhm.
And now the jail has housed many more people than the Boston Strangler.
Yes.
This was also a prison for many suspected witches during the Salem witch trials. Also, during the Civil War, it had multiple people in there. So, there's a lot of negative energy permeating these walls. There's a lot of haunting past and desperate prisoners. So, I can't imagine that it's all DeSalvo
Yeah,
doing
no.
this. Uh,
But I'm
but
sure his ghost would take credit for all of
yeah,
it if that's
exactly.
his
This is
MO.
so, this is so like yes, this is an accurate way. This is not I can't even what's the English? Yes, okay.
That's his MO.
That's his MO. Unsurprisingly, there are phantom noises that echo through this building, chains rattling, loud screams, agonizing cries, and many women weeping.
You know what's really interesting? I'm having a moment of like, whoa, how time works is so wild because when we covered this back in 17,
Mhm.
it had just been turned into apartments. So
Just
there
turned into
there were
apartments.
no stories from residents. Like they were
No.
being sold. And so now it's so fascinating to like
Hear
that there are
reports of what people
reports
are
from people who
feeling.
have lived there.
Okay, so we don't technically know if DeSalvo killed all 13 women, just as we don't know for certain if his spirit is bringing the negative paranormal
Mhm.
energy to these very haunted locations. But we do know that the case of the Boston Strangler has stuck with people for decades, and researchers and paranormal enthusiasts are still looking for answers. Was there more than one killer? And will DeSalvo come through an EVP session? Many people are trying. And that is the very condensed version of the Boston Strangler and some suspected hauntings.
Wow. It's devastating
Yeah.
and heartbreaking. And I have such sorrow and heartbreak for all these, the families, for the victims, for the lack of answers. And I think ultimately that is why so many of us are intrigued by true crime or even like ghost stories. It's
Mhm.
this inability to have conclusions or conclusive answers that makes us want answers more.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it's why
you're
we keep
right.
talking about it.
It is interesting because it's like when there is no conclusion, when it is a mystery, we are obsessed with it. And then as soon as we have an answer, we move on to the next thing that doesn't have
Yeah,
an answer.
right.
With all of these crime cases, like it's
Yeah,
really the things that have big missing gaps or pieces, or we don't know who the killer is,
yeah.
or the all of the paranormal. That's
All
why
of
we
it.
do the entire show. Is like
Yeah.
we don't have answers or reasons. It's all speculation.
It's also like, if we're gonna go zoom out a little bit, like we're all looking for a purpose in life. And I think most people spend their whole lives looking for that. Like it's like constantly chasing an answer
Mhm.
that I think in a zoomed in version, true crime or searching for answers on these life events that we observe is like the smaller version of that on a grand
Yeah.
scheme. We're just constantly trying to understand.
Wonderfully said. How introspective.
I'm spending a lot of time inside here. I'm a thinker, not a speaker.
I think you're both for us.
Sometimes. But yeah, I mean, it is a morbid fascination that a lot of people have.
Mhm.
And yes, there has been, I think, a period of time where we've maybe used it for entertainment, but at the core, it comes down to wanting to understand something so that we can either have closure or so that we can, I don't know, there's just like a, once we have an answer,
There's a
we can understand
curiosity.
it a little bit more.
Yeah. Like aliens and UFOs and all of that goodness.
And abduct me, please. Is basically the message I'm saying. Okay,
What even are we?
I do have,
Is this you?
this is me. Well, I didn't write it, but I have a listener story from our listener, Lisette. I saw a really nice message that I will read on the podcast that Lisette says at the end.
Oh,
Okay. In June of 2000, I was invited to go with my aunt, Tia, my uncle, Tio, and grandma to Boston for my cousin's college graduation.
abuela.
Yes.
Tia and Tio and abuela.
I had just graduated high school and was so excited for this travel opportunity. I hadn't seen my cousin in years, so I was excited to visit him too, and I was so proud of his achievements. He is like a brother to me. While there, he took all of us over to Boston to absorb the rich history. And I didn't have any paranormal experiences until
Uh-oh.
we visited the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston.
Oh, I've actually never been.
Really?
Yeah.
Well,
I've been to a
maybe
lot of the other museums.
maybe you'll go after this. My family had been at the museum for a little over an hour, and we had just passed the ancient Egypt display of mummies, coffins, weapons, and pottery, to name a few. It was pretty uneventful, paranormal wise. As we left that area and traveled towards another exhibit, Tia stopped dead in her tracks. She had been fine the entire visit and was smiling and enjoying the artifacts and paintings. I had been walking just a few steps ahead of her, and when I did not hear her following, I turned and I saw an expression I will never forget. Her face had turned instantly bright cherry red. Her mouth was slightly agape, and she was holding her breath. Worried, I scurried back to her and held her hand. Her hand was so hot.
Oh.
I asked if she was okay, and she did not respond immediately. I called for my uncle. My eyes were tearing up because I thought she was having a heart attack or a
Oh
stroke.
my gosh, that is very scary.
My uncle came over and said, Mia, don't worry. Your Tia has this happen every once in a while.
Just a
Shocked.
mild possession?
Shocked, I turned to my Tia and asked again, are you okay? She replied, there is something evil. I can't go over there. Her eyes welled up, but she did not sob. The tears fell on her cheeks, and she brushed them away immediately as if embarrassed. She turned to the left and walked towards the gift store to sit down. I asked my cousin, what was that all about? I'm so worried. Is she really okay? And my cousin said something that shocked me. She feels things and sees things sometimes. She hears things too. And I was like, oh, what? This is the first time I've ever heard of it.
I like
How
how
can
Tia
this
was just trying
be?
to freaking brush this off, being like, "Yeah, it just happens sometimes, ignore her."
Yeah. Well, no, the cousin was trying to brush it off.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh.
yeah.
I'm like,
But
no, Tia's very psychic."
I feel like if it is your norm, then like
Yeah.
it's like, don't worry. I think they're just trying to reassure Lisette. Meanwhile, my aunt was sitting with my uncle, who was reading a book from the shop as if it was nothing. I then saw the color return to her face, and she looked peaceful again, just with a little bit of worry. She didn't look up. She kept her gaze on the floor and seemed like she was just focusing on breathing. I was so intrigued with what had just happened that I wanted to investigate. I was walking with my grandma into the hall. My aunt said that she could not enter. I asked my grandma what this was all about, and she said, nah, your aunt is crazy. She says she can feel otherworldly presences sometimes good, sometimes bad. I don't believe it.
What?
But I did. I didn't feel anything at first when I entered the hall, but I felt a slight chill as I turned the corner. The hall was long and narrow. It had furniture pieces and some artwork. I particularly felt something cold around a bed frame and a painting. I've never had personal experiences, but I do think there is some energy or spirit presence out there. The hall started feeling claustrophobic, so I left. I went back to my aunt, asked her how she was feeling, and she said much better. I asked her about her ability to feel, hear, and see things, and she said she's had the ability since her childhood in Nicaragua. She said, most of the time the spirits are harmless and just passing by, so I don't pay them any mind. But this one, this man, he is evil.
Ah,
He has done terrible things,
my gosh.
really bad things.
And he's just hanging out in the museum where all these people are?
I was speechless. Do you know what he did? I asked. She said, yes, but it was a long time ago. A really long time ago. Poor women. She didn't want to talk about it anymore, so I let it go. I asked her over 10 years later about that incident. She remembered, she told me the same thing and said that sometimes, though not common, she picks up on something evil. Thanks for reading. I really appreciate the friendly format and insight into both of your lives. It truly feels like listening to friends. Stay safe and spooky, and see you on the other side. Best wishes, Lisette. She then says, you don't need to read this on the podcast, but I do think it's.
But we did.
P.S. Sabrina, I used to feel like no one saw me either. My mom always said, love yourself. When you do, the light will shine. I was always introverted and shy. Self love goes a long way. Cheers for your accomplishments. It's okay to pat yourself on the back. And it's okay to fail. Just be. You are wonderful. Corinne, you are too.
That's so
I
nice,
know.
though.
That's why I'm reading it.
Oh.
Did I say it was bad?
No, no, I'm
Oh.
like, "But you don't have to read about me, like, this is just so beautiful for you."
You both make me laugh on my boring LA traffic car ride home from my work at the hospital. Seriously, thank you both. And I just think that is a very beautiful message that I have always needed to hear.
Mhm,
And I've been focusing on and trying to do a lot this year. But I also think everyone listening, all of you, whoever's listening, you are beautiful. You are important.
mhm.
Love yourself.
You is kind,
You
you
do
is
shine.
smart, you is important.
You shine. And I think one thing that I want to talk about her story in a second, but one thing that I have spent a lot of time loving about myself in the past year is something that I felt like I had been made to believe was wrong with me, is that I shine by letting other people shine sometimes.
Mhm.
Like I'm really good at lifting other people up and making people shine, which makes me shine. And I don't need to be like center of attention to shine. And you don't need to be.
No,
You can shine by doing things that people don't realize you're doing.
but you also can't prioritize other people's shine
No, yes,
over
you're right.
letting yourself
You're
shine.
right. But I think I was led to believe, I'm not saying this in the right way, but I think I was led to believe that my lack of desire to participate in a ton of social events or, ability to like turn on charm and stuff meant I was not doing something correct. But
Mm,
actually, I shine in those events because yes, I don't like those because I am really good at making room for other people, which is why I get so drained in those events
yeah.
because I help other people shine, which then means
Well,
I
that's why
I
people
don't
feel
shine
so
in those.
comfortable with you too, because you do open the space up. Like you're a very comforting person to be around
Thank you.
because your energy is like I feel like people probably tell you like their deep dark secrets, right? Because like
Some.
you are safe.
Thank you. Anyway, I feel like I'm not wording that properly, but basically I have learned to that just because someone shines in a different way does not mean and you don't shine in that way does not mean you don't shine. You shine.
Yes, absolutely, perfectly said.
Yeah. Get to know yourself.
Get
You
to know
might you might be
yourself.
surprised by how cool you are.
You are. I already knew you were the coolest, which is why I made you my best friend and business partner for the past 5 years. So I think everyone else knows already, but we're glad that you're learning now too.
Oh gosh.
We already
Okay,
thought you
enough
were
about
super
me.
cool.
Lisette, the story.
I know it's odd because it's like it could be so many things. Like it's all those poor women. Like, was it some of the witch trial stuff? Was it
A Strangler stuff.
the
Is
Strangler
it?
stuff.
Yeah, we have no idea.
It could be
And how
so
long
many different
ago
things.
was it attached to something in the museum that it's like this evil man who did some terrible things
Mhm.
to women in ancient Egypt or wherever, in the world that piece
Right.
was from?
Right. I know. Yeah, because that's another thing. It doesn't necessarily need to be Boston. It could just be that person saw some atrocities somewhere
Yeah.
and is now just stuck to this some
Ooh,
piece.
I also think about I just think art is so fascinating. We've talked about this before in, you know, episodes about like the crying boy and the what's the one I did recently? I forget what
The
the
Anguished Man?
no, the one that was that Zach Bagans has like a
Oh.
personalized. Why am I blanking?
Oh my gosh.
It's like the little girl and like the little boy.
Isn't it a series?
It's a series. Why
Yeah.
am I
I
blanking?
cannot remember.
Anyway, just about this idea that art kind of takes on a life of its own and artists pour their emotion and psyches and stories into the art that I almost imagine like there's this person from however many years ago who created this piece of art that is now maybe in a museum that holds his sins and his confessions.
Oh my gosh. This makes me view art therapy differently. But honestly, that could be well, it's one of those things where, like, when you think of art therapy, it's like healing pieces of yourself, but what if sometimes you accidentally just chip off these pieces of yourself?
It's a horcrux.
It's a Horcrux, and it's stuck into this, and then ah!
Here's the lesson: just don't be a terrible person, and
Yeah,
your art won't become
and give
possessed.
yourself grace as
Yes,
well, because
self love.
we can all have a comeback story.
Yeah, we're the comeback kids.
What the comeback is. Thank you to all of you.
Yes.
You can follow us on social media. You
Mhm.
can rate and review on iTunes. You can check out our website for merch if you want to represent the
Rep.
podcast, and also follow us for any future live show
Yeah.
information. Also, most importantly, if you have any ghost stories of your own, email us at twogirlsoneghostpodcast@gmail.com.
I don't know why I wanted to whisper 2 girls, 1 cup podcast at gmail.com.
And then, well, there you go. You
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
Give in to your
Join our
temptations.
Patreon. We have campfire stories. Watch us on YouTube. Therapy. There
Therapy is
will
good.
be therapy is great. Love yourself. I did say there will be, but I think I said it so mumbled that it sounded like therapy.
Yeah.
But in the YouTube video, there will be photos that Corinne referenced
Hmm.
throughout the episode, and we're with each other. So if you want to see us interact and look at each other,
Here it is.
here it is. Here we
And
are.
we recently brought back the sponsors page on our website too. So if
Yes,
you're looking for those codes, we made them a little bit easier
you made them. That
to
was you.
access.
That was all you.
Don't do it from a web browser, not from your mobile
Well,
phone,
now people
because
are gonna look at it from their mobile phone,
I'm not a web
Corinne.
designer and I did what I could.
You did. You did great. Yes, we love you all. We love Christina, who edits this podcast. Thank you so much for all your hard work. And thank you for all of your hard work by suffering through listening to us. Just kidding. No, we're great. We love each other. We love ourselves.
Eternal suffering over here at Two Girls One Ghost.
Yay.
Thank you to all of you. We love you, and we will see you on
The
the other side.
Very spooky.